We turn now to South Carolina Republican Congressman Trey Gowdy. He's the chairman of the House Oversight Committee, and he joins us this morning from Greenville, South Carolina. Good morning, Congressman.
Good morning, John.
This hearing that's going to happen this week in the Senate Judiciary Committee, you've chaired some pretty high-profile, politically charged hearings. What are the risks involved?
There's a risk to either side that's not perceived as being fair. I've been in lots of sex assault cases, but not since I've been in Congress. You have got to be fair to the witness. You have got to give the witness an opportunity to fully answer the question. You need to eschew these 5-minute increments that we so often use in Congress. 5 minutes is not long enough for anyone to appropriately question either Dr. Ford or Judge Kavanaugh. I am confident that that Senator Grassley, Chairman Grassley, will run this in a respectful way. But the American people, regardless of whether you're Republican or Democrat, expect these witnesses to be treated fairly, and I'm confident that they will be.
One of the questions that Christine Blasey Ford has said is that she would have liked the FBI to do a kind of neutral fact-finding on this. What do you think about that?
I'm a big fan of the FBI, John, but they don't investigate sex assault cases. There are very, very few federal sex assault cases. So my first question would be the FBI to investigate what? There's no crime scene to process. There's no forensics to evaluate. What the FBI could do is go interview Dr. Ford and interview Judge Kavanaugh. But they've already interviewed Judge Kavanaugh. And even if they did interview Dr. Ford, she still has to testify. So the only role I can see the Bureau playing is identifying other witnesses that may have knowledge. Some of that's already been done by Dr. Ford. Judge Kavanaugh's defense is he wasn't there, so you wouldn't expect him to produce witnesses. But I don't know what people expect the FBI to do. They're not human polygraphs, so they can't tell us who's telling the truth.
But my understanding, though, is that the president, in these nominations, the president can ask the FBI to do it. So while they may not investigate sexual assault, he could in terms of getting an accurate record. And I guess the thinking is the FBI is a neutral fact finder here, and we don't know what we don't know. And so they, without all the partisanship and the charged nature of partisanship, could get some of the basic facts down, which would, it's not just about finding information for the general record, it's informing also the questions that the senators may then ask of both of them.
The FBI, I know, has already interviewed Judge Kavanaugh. I have no issues with the FBI taking a second, third, eighth look, if that's what it takes to find out what happened and to fully air all the facts. I just want people to have realistic expectations. I mean, what the FBI can do is go interview Dr. Ford, which is what the senators are planning on doing this week. They can interview Judge Kavanaugh, which is what the senators are doing, but they can't then come in and repeat back what either of those witnesses say. You can't determine credibility unless you actually hear from the witness herself and himself.
Let me ask you about what standard one should use in trying to sort through all of these facts. This is not a court of law. What's your feeling about the standard that should be used to determine who's telling what the truth of this is?
That's a great question, John, and I have struggled with that question. My bias is toward sex assault victims. I spent 20 years believing them sometimes when nobody else did. I am used to the beyond a reasonable doubt. That is an incredibly high burden, but it ought to be if you're going to take away someone's freedom. It also ought to be a high burden when you are going to impact someone's reputation. And make no mistake, both Dr. Ford and Judge Kavanaugh will live with consequences of this for the remainder of their lives. But as it relates to Judge Kavanaugh, when you have been accused of something that is a crime, it's an incredibly serious crime. It is a crime that goes to the heart of your character. I think American people expect there to be a high evidentiary burden. And I'm really disappointed when I hear senators say they either believe or don't believe witnesses that they have never interviewed or heard from. How can you do that, John? How can you make a credibility assessment if you've never bothered to interview either of the two principals?
Let me move on and ask you about the reporting this week about Rod Rosenstein, the Deputy Attorney General. Some back and forth about a New York Times report that he suggested wearing a wire with the president. His response, or the defendants or defenders of his have said this was just a joke. What do you make of all that?
It's not a very funny joke, but what I would say is the same thing you and I just got talking about. Rod deserves the right to be heard. And I'm sure at some point the president will bring Rod in and say, Rod, If you think I am incompetent, if you feel the need to wear a wire when you're talking to me, then why are you serving in my administration? And it may be that Rod says, Mr. President, none of that happened. We won't know that until we see the McCabe memos, which if you really want to see them, don't run for Congress. Go be a reporter because they've seen them and we have not. Look at the McCabe memos, find out who else, if anyone, was in the room, and then give Rod a chance to explain whether or not it's true and the context in which it was said. But one thing is clear. Whether you're Republican or Democrat president, you have a right to a deputy attorney general that doesn't think you're incompetent and doesn't feel the need to audio tape conversations with you.
Andrew McCabe being the former deputy director of the FBI. What do you make of the president's comment about his attorney general, that when asked in an interview, he said, I don't have an attorney general? What do you make of just the general relationship between the president and the Department of Justice?
It's terrible, and it's heartbreaking, and I understand the president's frustration. The frustration is that he picked, out of all the universe of attorneys he could have picked, he picked one that had to recuse himself from that office's most significant investigation. But he did pick him, and I would prefer that they keep their differences private. There's nothing to keep the president from bringing Jeff Sessions over and having a stern conversation about priorities or policies, but the public fighting, to me, this is a different office, John. It's not the Department of Agriculture or Commerce. It's a blindfolded woman holding a set of scales that each of us has to have confidence in, and it's sad to watch, quite frankly.
Speaking of that confidence, just in 20 seconds here, what do you think about the president declassifying this information from the FISA warrant about an investigation into his own behavior?
Well, I've read every bit of that information, and 99.9% of it has nothing to do with him. In fact, 100% of it may have nothing to do with him. I generally am on the side of transparency with the caveat, do nothing that jeopardizes national security or impacts our relationship with our allies. I think the president's taken a reasonable approach, which has given Chris Wray and Dan Coates a chance to come in and advocate for why it should not be released. But I've seen all of it, John, and with the exception of one document, I don't think anybody's mind is going to be changed when they read this stuff.
All right, Trey Gowdy, thanks so much for being with us.